This episode of the Backcountry podcast is made possible thanks to the support of 10 Barrel Brewing. 10 Barrel Brewing is all about drinking beer outside and stoking passion for the outdoors by contributing a portion of their proceeds from beer sales to nonprofit organizations. Purchase Profuse Juice IPA and you're supporting Surfrider Foundation. If your preference is Hazy Trail IPA, sip confidently knowing you're helping the Outdoor Alliance. The winter seasonal Pray for Snow has proudly supported Protect Our Winters for the last 4 years, and a portion of proceeds from 10 Barrel's new beer, Nature Calls, a mountain-style IPA, proudly goes to the Conservation Alliance. With 10 Barrel Brewing, enjoy your craft beer outdoors even more, knowing that every can you crack open is doing good for the outdoor spaces we all love.
All of these same cognitive biases and heuristics apply to the forecaster in the hot seat. Like we can make mistakes in spite of ourselves as well.
Welcome to the Backcountry podcast. I'm Adam Howard. We're calling this episode The Seer, Avalanche forecaster and sage Drew Hardesty. A 22-year veteran avalanche forecaster for the Utah Avalanche Center, Drew Hardesty doesn't simply give the avalanche forecast for the greater Wasatch. He tells the snowpack's story. He's part scientist, part philosopher, part skier, part poet. What other forecast might relate a scene from Cormac McCarthy's book, The Crossing, to a blown avalanche forecast? How many snow scientists were Naval Intelligence officers during Desert Storm or have received a federal Valor Award for aiding 17 lightning strike victims on the Grand Teton? Drew's life experiences allow him to see the snow through different eyes. I caught up with Drew in early February, just before the backcountry body count shot up exponentially around the country. Drew Hardesty, welcome to the Backcountry podcast.
Oh, it's really nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to see you over Zoom. As we were corresponding in advance of this interview, you shared with me a little trip you were on recently from your home in Salt Lake City up to the Tetons, where you've spent a lot of your time. And you shared that you'd been involved, or you triggered an avalanche, or witnessed one. Can you take us through that and what kind of snowpack they're seeing up there?
It's certainly been one of those seasons. Many areas around the Intermountain West were fairly dry early season, and then in the last month or so, during periods of high pressure, we've built various layers of either surface hoar or these facet crust combinations, which can be very problematic with subsequent loading. And last weekend, many areas around the West saw pretty significant snowfall. It was in part related, not unrelated, I should say, to the atmospheric river event that really just overwhelmed many parts of California. And, even with the leftovers, many of us in Idaho and in Wyoming and Utah, saw upwards of probably a 1.5 feet to 2 feet of snow with very strong southwest winds ahead of time. And that really put things on edge. It led to one fatality here in the Wasatch Range last weekend. That was a skier out of bounds on Square Top, leaving the Canyons Resort. And then, so my wife and I were out of town. We were up staying at a friend's place up in Driggs in Teton Valley. Of course, I spent most of my time over in Lupin Meadows there as a climbing ranger for many years. But it was nice to be on the quieter side there. And so we were touring with our good friend Don Sheriff. He's longtime owner of American Avalanche Institute. We had planned to meet there on Teton Pass at 7:30, thinking, oh well, we'll get a parking spot, but no luck. As I was telling him, I was like, man, I got to get back to the Wasatch where it's quiet.
Oh man, yeah, that's quite a scene up there.
It was madness, Howie, and so we continued up and over the pass, heading into Wyoming, and then cut back around into Trail Creek, and then the old pass road. And from there, we just broke trail just shy of thigh deep up towards Avalanche Bowl, knowing that there had been an avalanche that had been triggered there the day before.
And this was, what did you say, a D3?
Yes, it all things told, breaking trail up there from below, getting up there over onto the ridge to sort of eyeball the avalanche that had been probably remotely triggered the day before, because it's very easy to get out there from the pass proper, as you're heading south from the pass. I went over to go and take a look at that avalanche, and then you hear the classic, woomph, and then you see the crack, and there's the dust cloud taking off down the slope, and then you're seeing the wide propagation both up the ridge and then pretty far down the ridge as well. It went all the way around to sort of southeast facing, and by and large, if you stitch the two avalanches together, we're probably over 1,000 feet wide and about 2 feet deep. And so a pretty real avalanche, we'd say. And in our business, that's what you do. You go out and try to see what the avalanche conditions are and why and what the weaknesses are, and try to find the habitat, what aspects and elevations, and what's the culprit here. And that's your job as an avalanche forecaster, Howie, to go out there and see avalanches. You might trigger them, but look at the structure and then convey that to people so they can make good decisions. So I sort of feel like, in a way, that's good work, and be able to convey that to the public as we did.
How did what you witnessed there match up with the forecast from that time?
Yes, good question. They had a considerable avalanche danger for mid and upper elevations, and that was well borne out by that avalanche. So it's good to have data to sort of support what you're saying, and I think that spoke volumes to sort of reaffirm the messaging that they had.
Recently, you guys published on your website, Utah Avalanche Center.org, a piece titled "On the Nature of Forecasting and Why We Get It Wrong." Go into that piece a little bit, because I'd like to know, obviously you guys are snow scientists, right? You're not gods, and you do, and sometimes it is wrong. Tell us about that piece and where you were coming from on it.
Yes, we play important roles, Howie, in our community. The forecasters that issue backcountry danger ratings, we are known in our community, and we are striving to sort of be able to communicate important information so people can be armed with a weapon of knowledge, because above all, we all are in it by and large for the same thing. We are so into the powder skiing and riding, and we want to come home at the end of the day. And in that way, I feel that we are able to connect communities and connect people with really good information. But make no mistake, I think what we aim to achieve is no small challenge. I mean, in that way of forecasting avalanches and forecasting danger and forecasting how the snow is going to behave. I mean, forecasting is inherently a tricky occupation or pursuit, because you're going to get it wrong sometimes, and the consequences of getting that wrong, these consequences are very real. For me, this is my 22nd season as an avalanche forecaster here at the Utah Avalanche Center. I've been wrong before, and I'm going to be wrong again. But in this case, a couple Januaries ago, it could be argued that this is the most blown avalanche forecast of my season, and it brought about such great introspection of, why do we blow avalanche forecasts? Why do we get it wrong? Because, as I said before, the consequences of getting it wrong are very real.
Tell us about this particular January from a couple of years ago, and what did it mean to get it wrong?
In this way, we had a fairly dormant snowpack and avalanche situation where, owing to a week and a half or so of high pressure, overall the avalanches were pretty dormant. The basal weaknesses and the mid-pack weaknesses were fairly quiet. The main thing for us to keep an eye on were looking at how the snowpack along the surface was faring. As you know, we always say that today's snow surface is tomorrow's weak layer, and that was very much the case. You know, how the snow surface had been weakening fairly significantly during that period of clear, sunny, cold skies. And it wasn't so much the surface horror was developing, but what we call near surface facets, when the low density surface snow starts to recrystallize into faceted grains, recycled powder or soft settled powder, it could be called. But it becomes weak, and many people say, oh, it starts to dry out, but that's not really the case. And so if you're looking and paying attention, both through instrumentation or forecasting or just hopefully being out there on the snow, you're starting to see the snow get weak.
When you're talking about creating consensus, when you want to drop the forecast, or I should say, what's the word I'm looking for? Low, moderate, high. What are those rank? What do you call those?
Yes, that's our danger scale.
So when you drop the danger scale to low, you want a consensus, because obviously that's telling a lot of people that might not otherwise know that they might just be able to do whatever they wanted.
Yes, that's right. Yes. I mean, we always say that low danger doesn't mean no danger, but by and large, when people see that great green glowing orb, something happens to them.
Yeah.
And there's something in the chemistry of our brains when that occurs. And there's all these sort of things that are inherent with that, because when people see that, then we find that, they tend to relax their safe travel habits, or they tend to go out alone, or they go into more terrain where even a very small avalanche could have significant consequences.
Green means go.
Green means go. I mean, as it should be, right? Like, there's by and large an inverse relationship between the danger rating and the available terrain that people choose, right? The higher the danger rating, the fewer choices they have for safe travel. And as you drop the danger rating, then they have more choices for terrain. And so if you drop it all the way down to low, it's like open season, as Roger Atkins described. It's like that white canvas out there, just take anything. But if you're wrong with low and it's actually moderate, well, there are consequences to that. It was truly low that first day of when I dropped it to low, and then I'm in there the next day, and I'm anchored, as they say, to that previous day's low danger. And what I knew ahead of time is that we were going to have a significant storm coming in that evening into the next day. And so in a way, you sort of want to hedge a bit, keep your gunpowder dry, as they might say, because the danger is really going to be ramping up. Problem is that, to take a magnifying glass to this, that I under forecast both the timing and strength of the prefrontal southwest winds. And so I kept the danger as low for that second day in anticipation of the danger skyrocketing for the next couple of days. But the winds really picked up, and they started to move some snow. And true enough, many people found lots of sensitive, fresh wind slabs on many aspects and elevations at the mid and upper elevations, and the danger was not low at all. In fact, I think we counted 8 skiers and riders caught and carried in avalanches that day, including one critical burial up in Broads Fork, where a couple, they're now married, they were on the up track to the Blue Ice Run and triggered the avalanche there on the up track that broke out well above them. Both of them were caught and carried. He was partially buried. She was critically buried. That is, her face was down in the snowpack, and unfortunately, I think part of her ski was sticking out. But he had to dig himself out and ski down and go and pull her out, and she was on the edge of things, and she was able to sort of get her wits about her, but they were able to ski back out to the trailhead with some help, and they went to the ER. So it was a very close call with those guys, and I saw him submit an observation from the emergency room to us. We have a great observer forum, and that came in that evening, and I connected with him the next day, and we chatted about their outing. Either the next day or a couple of days later, because I think that's our role that we play, both ahead of the game, but then afterwards as well, to connect with people because they are us.
How do you process that? I mean, do you carry, and would other forecasters, do you feel like when you've made a call like you did, and there's that outcome where you have a half a dozen to a dozen folks get caught out? How does that sit with you, and how do you process that?
Yes, I think there are many ways, Howie. This is such a great question. Many ways to approach that. Once again, I feel that if we go into the morning, with a clear mind and with the right intentions, and have approached the problem in a professional way, then you are doing the best that you can. And I think people understand that. Once again, we're talking about a forecast, and when you look at it from the perspective that people can even get a nowcast wrong, and people can even get a backcast wrong, was something I've written about in the past called hindsight 2040, when they're sort of looking back at something and they're coming away with it with the wrong lessons altogether. Forecasts are themselves inherently tricky. I'm not going to try to wave around any sort of like Buddhist or Zen flags or any literature in that way, but I think if we approach things the right way, then we are doing the best that we can, and we're giving people the best information that we have as a professional. And they need to go into the backcountry knowing that and making their own decisions. And in that way, one of the best ways to debrief that was, I felt what we did is that not only did I meet with that couple individually, but I held a fireside chat at a studio where 50 people attended, and half of them had been out that day with all of them, nearly all of them, that had been involved. And what a great way to go back and look at my decision-making from the hot seat at 4 a.m. that morning, and from their decision-making in the field. Is really rich, Howie, and I was glad for that.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a bit of a process, and some of what you're sharing with me indicates to me that these are tools you've picked up over the years. If you're a first, second, third year forecaster who perhaps doesn't have a mentor to deal with some of the challenges of getting it wrong and coping with it and dealing with it, almost like as any first responder would, or anyone in any kind of life-saving vocation, it seems like there's some learning that needs to be done so that you can keep going, without carrying too much of a burden. Because if you do, then you wouldn't be able to do it for 22 years as you have. Is there anything to that?
Yes, 100 times over, Howie. It was really, in many ways, a gift, because I wanted to look more closely at why forecasters get it wrong sometimes. And I found it comes down to three things. And this is going to sound really familiar to you and all your listeners, but forecasters get it wrong for one of three reasons. We get it wrong because maybe we blow the weather forecast. Maybe we underappreciate, the winds, as I did, or you get the cloud cover wrong, or, you forecasted it was going to be a foot of snow and it was 2 feet of snow, or vice versa. Maybe you say, hey, it's going to snow 2 feet and you only get 6 inches. So, maybe you blow the weather forecast. And if you blow the weather forecast, you're probably going to blow the avalanche forecast. On another side of things, maybe you didn't appreciate sort of the inherent uncertainty because of a persistent weak layer that is sort of within the snowpack. You maybe misunderstood the nature of the snowpack insofar as that you didn't have enough data or field time, or maybe you're a younger forecaster and didn't have the experience with depth or facets and crusts and so forth. And if you're on the learning curve, you're taking the community with you.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, our hero Daniel Kahneman, right, the PhD behavioral economics, thinking fast and slow. He had this one classic piece that he said the question is not whether these experts are well trained; it's whether their world is predictable. And that resonates with me as an avalanche forecaster. But to tie in the last bit, I guess there has been so much time, thank God, in the last 15 years. Doug Fessler, Jill Fredston probably were at the outset of this, back with their seminal book, Snow Sense, that we all kind of grew up reading back in the day. And then Ian McCammon and others have embraced and brought to light so much of how we can make mistakes in spite of ourselves, the human factor. All of these same cognitive biases and heuristics apply to the forecaster in the hot seat. Like, we can make mistakes in spite of ourselves as well.
I'd like to jump back to when this began for you. You've been doing it in Utah for 22 years. How did you get into this career? And where did you come from to get into this career? What was your path?
For me, I was an undergrad at the University of Colorado and had been there for 4 years, but I still had one more semester to go. But I took off some time before that last semester, and I moved up to Jackson and lived at the Teton Science School out in Kelly. And was really keen I was 21 or 20, I think I was 21 years old, Howie, and I remember that, I had been bitten by the backcountry bug. I'd been skiing a little bit in the backcountry in Colorado, undergrad, and the scene. And so going up there, I signed up for an avalanche class with Rod Newcomb. And Kelly Elder was one of the other instructors. And I loved it. And it made such an impact upon me that I said, this was just like sort of finding that, it was like finding that life partner. You're like, oh, there you are. It was that aha moment for me, Howie. And so I took that, love of just learning about snow and avalanches and crystallography, if you will. And I sort of took that back to the University of Colorado and enrolled in some courses to sort of help round that out. And at that time, it was snow and ice physics. And then I took another class called Fiction of the American West. And I look back at how pivotal it was for me, because I feel like I was able to bring in my love of writing with understanding sort of the physical processes going on both within the snowpack, and then the fracture mechanics to sort of create the avalanche. And that's really what it is, is to try to understand the snowpack, Howie, and then as a forecaster, message that through writing or presentations or photo and video and forecasting. It's a very beautiful marriage between those two things.
To hear you talk about both the science and then the communication is fascinating to me as a writer myself, but I'm no scientist. And I wonder, and I might regret asking this question, but I wonder how you look at how the CDC and our government officials in your state or in the nation have, they've got the science to deal with this pandemic, and then they've got the opportunity to communicate to the public their findings. And unlike in normal times, they have the opportunity and perhaps the obligation to do it every day, just like an avalanche forecaster would. Do you find yourself critiquing this effort with your science and writer brain at work, or is that too much of a stretch?
No, it's fascinating. I really feel there are very strong parallels with both avalanche forecasting, public safety messaging in the avalanche world, as well as regarding sort of the pandemic. And I've had some really rich conversations with our state epidemiologist here, Dr. Angela Dunn, here in Utah, and she has been right there next to the governor through all of this. Just these conversations of sort of struggles of trying to understand the situation and convey that to people so they can make good, informed decisions. Now, with the pandemic, it was a little bit like trying to understand a completely new type of snow and a new type of avalanche and learning about it while you're trying to convey the information to the public. And that in itself is fraught with all of these pitfalls, because I think the public wants decisiveness and they want knowns and certainties. And there's just so much uncertainty out there. And we as humans have trouble with uncertainties and probabilities. And I think the lessons that you learn as a public safety messenger are to speak honestly and clearly and simply in telling people what you know and what you don't know, and how best to sort of give people ways to minimize the exposure and the probability, and sort of how to minimize the consequences of oblivion, if you will, of getting caught in the avalanche or catching the disease from someone else. And it's always an evolving situation, and the parallels are really keen in my view.
Fascinating. The pandemic has brought to your world a great volume of new customers, if you will, new people to communicate with. We've had this conversation for a year now about how, the interest in the outdoors, whether it's mountain biking or ice skating or backcountry skiing, has been amplified tenfold in many cases. How has this, we know just the evidence of cars parking at the trailhead is very clear. How has this changed how you communicate, to whom you communicate? What kind of measures have you taken to try to reach this new audience, if you will?
It's really given us an opportunity to recalibrate, if you will. The classic understanding of education is when you ask somebody a question, if they really go into the weeds of it, and it takes them 15 minutes to sort of try to explain something that's complex or chaotic, and it takes them a really long time, there's a disconnect there. I worked for Bruce Tremper for a very long time here at the Utah Avalanche Center, and his classic thing is, people will ask you what time it is, and you want to tell them how the watch works. But you've got it all wrong if that's the way. And so knowing that we have all these newer users, whether they're mechanized or whether they're human powered or whatever, is to simplify the message and try to get that out in no uncertain terms. And so that's been a really refreshing way for us to once again recalibrate how we're messaging to people. We have realized that we don't have a snowpack problem so much as we have a marketing problem. And again, talking with so many advertising and marketing executives, how it's been really fascinating, because the art of it is like, how do we get people to buy what we're selling if we're selling public safety? And so we have tried to take a few tips and tricks from that community to be able to do that. And we find that that's been pretty successful so far.
What are some of those tips and tricks?
Yeah, the art of storytelling, the art of getting people to feel a story that you're telling them. We find that people don't necessarily react when you give them just the facts. It has to emotionally resonate with them, Howie, because we're emotional creatures. And at the top of the ridge line, they may not remember exactly what Hardesty told them, but they're going to remember, how did Hardesty make me feel when I heard his forecast or read his forecast? And so the art of making this sort of emotional connection to be able to impact people when they're making important decisions in the backcountry. There's also something about sort of the one-on-one connection with people, like the direct communication. And that has been done a couple ways this winter. The first one, we have really made great strides to have platoons of volunteers at the trailheads, at the backcountry access gates, to be able to make that one-on-one connection with people, to see their face and say, hey, it's dangerous in the backcountry. Half of all of our snowboard and ski fatalities in the last 20 years have been people just like you heading out of bounds. Are you wearing a beacon? Do you know what the conditions are like today? And the other thing is, we feel that social media was invented for the avalanche world. If we can post a very large avalanche that was triggered or was naturally or spontaneously, ran the day before, and maybe do a quick video, that term viral is like, it's so outdated now, but it's still the thing. Is like, if we can share that information to a group of people, and then they can share that with their groups and their groups, and so on and on and on, man, we're really getting that message out. And it's really been a powerful medium for us.
Do you feel that you're getting the message out better today than 10 years ago? I mean, granted, the market, if you will, has grown exponentially, but along with it, these new tools have also emerged.
It's been really powerful. I mean, back when I began, it was expected that you would call the avalanche hotline and listen to the forecaster drone on and on and on about, in many cases, maybe the science behind the snowpack and why the avalanches are being caused, and on and on and on, and sort of trying to use that to make good decisions was probably very challenging for many people. Although there was the human element of hearing the voice behind that. But we feel like that through really bringing in the community to help support their Avalanche Center and making them a part of it through their own observations, we have really felt that we are all on the same team. And so instead of making people come to us to get the information, we are going to them and going to where they are. And we know people are on their phones, and they're on Instagram, and they're on TikTok. And if we can put that stuff right there at their fingertips, and they can see the avalanches that are occurring or where those avalanches are most dangerous, and we can have them snap a photo and submit an observation, or tag us on Instagram, it's huge. And it's gone a really long way for sort of the evolution of avalanche forecasting and public safety.
So through social media, we've seen the feedback loop has become more complete for you, because it is so easy for folks to make an observation and get it into your hands or in front of your eyes without having to go, give this long narrative about what went down. So that you've got to have more information than you've ever had before.
It's amazing. It's gold to us, Howie. I mean, we started our professional observers program, back in the late 80s, late 80s, I think, where we were paying people for observations, and we still do that because we know that we can't be everywhere at once, and to be able to get more data is going to be crucial, And like I always like to end a presentation or something like that, like, hey, welcome, welcome now to the Avalanche community. Know that the Avalanche Center forecast is always right, but you can help us be more right. Submit your observations to us.
This makes me think of this the Avatech technology that unfortunately, while it still exists, it's part of I think a research thing up in Alaska now. But I was struck with that technology at the opportunities that we might have if that were ever widely adopted or could be funded to a point where it was used widely, that would be a great bit of information that would be automatic for forecast centers globally. How familiar are you with that technology, and were you at that 5 years ago hopeful that might be something tremendous for the craft?
Yes, I did know those guys. They parked in they set up shop in Park City. The concept is really right on. For my money at the Utah Avalanche Center, however, we already had a excellent network and platform that included, mapping, easy data entry. We felt like we already had that. I do feel that there are many areas across the country that didn't have that necessarily already set up for their platforms. And so, the concept we had already embraced a decade prior to that. But long story short, the sharing of information is fundamental to helping keep people safe. And I think that was an excellent platform to help many regions that didn't already have something like that.
Right. And just to be clear for our listeners who don't know about this technology, it was essentially a smart probe where it would feed data from the probe directly to your phone, aggregate it, and then it was available for use however, folks wanted to use it. And unfortunately, it didn't really catch on for any number of reasons. But and I don't mean to sidetrack us there, but we are talking about the volume of data that you in Utah are privy to, certainly in the Salt Lake region, because you have such a large user group and a large population, and you're, I would guess, relatively well funded compared to the Crested Butte Avalanche Center, for instance. So that's got to be a huge advantage for forecasting. Is just the more data you have, the better decisions you can make. Is it that simple?
It is that simple. Yep. I mean, there's so much has come along. I mean, the weather forecasting has improved. The number of observations have improved. Our understanding of the snow has improved. Our platforms and messaging has improved. It's really come a long way, and we are pretty pleased. Our work is far from over, but with the skyrocketing numbers in the backcountry, again, both mechanized and human powered, that's no secret. It's not lost on anyone, and yet our numbers, our fatalities, have flatlined, to be precise, if not diminished a touch. And we feel good about that, but we know that we still have a lot of work to do.
So I would suppose, given you guys it's been relatively low tide in Utah so far this year. A lot of high pressure lately. Now you're getting some snow. I would go out on a limb and speculate that some of the low numbers of incidents are directly the result of not the volume of people out there, but the snowpack itself being, there just hasn't been a lot of new snow. But I jump back to last spring when all the resorts closed early, and it was chaos in the Wasatch for a while. Do you anticipate you're going to get back to the levels of incidents that you had in March and April of last year, given this large volume of folks, or is it because the ski areas are operating, perhaps it won't be as bad as it was then?
That's a great question and would be really hard to forecast, Howie. I guess I would draw upon what the Colorado Avalanche Information Center did. Some of their preliminary research was sort of looking at who actually was involved in avalanche accidents last spring when the world was going to an end. And And they found that it was not the beginner necessarily that was sort of the highest group that was involved in avalanche accidents, that it was sort of the intermediate advanced group. And local IFMGA guide Anna Keeling here found similar numbers. Like, who's getting involved in those avalanche accidents or close calls last spring? Wasn't a beginner, but I guess you have to find where sort of the arc of instability and desire intersect, and it requires both of those things to happen. And so we'll see how that plays out for us this spring. It certainly helps that the ski areas are operating and people can go enjoy world-class powder, there at the ski areas for sure.
So at the outset of our conversation, you shared your trip, your experience up to the Tetons. I know how I go about when I travel, how I get to know the snowpack before I get there. And I don't know that it's right. Certainly it relies in large part on local knowledge, reading the forecast, trying to get not just reading the forecast right before I get there, but if I have a trip planned out, kind of following it, or if I'm going to go to 2 or 3 zones a year, trying to follow all those packs over the course of the year. What would you tell someone who is going to be traveling and wants to go to a new zone? And is it just that simple? Just try to keep track as it goes? Or what are some of the tricks that you impart to folks that might be on the move?
I guess it depends upon their experience and education level. My neighbor across the street asked me not long ago, he said, I want to get into the backcountry. What should I know? And that presents itself like that opportunity. How do you distill something down? And so what I told him, I said, well, look at the avalanche danger, look at the forecast for the day. And if it's considerable or higher, don't go. If they mention persistent slab or deep slab or persistent weak layer, don't go. And that was it. I just distilled that down to him because that's where people are going to get into trouble,
Right.
So for me, it could be really hard to try to capture all the nuances of the snowpack if you're looking at 3 or 4 different areas in which you wish to recreate. And so I guess for me, if I know that I'm going to be heading up to the Tetons or to the Sawtooths or Alaska, maybe a couple weeks beforehand, I start reading the avalanche forecast every single day. I start to look at the habitat and the nature of the avalanches out there because they are something that generally confine themselves to a pattern. What kind of avalanches are they? Where are they? What aspect? What elevation? How big are they? How recently have they run naturally? How recently have they been triggered by someone on the slope? And you can start to put together a mental map, Howie, of where the danger is. And based upon your own risk threshold, you're going to do one of 2 things. You're either going to avoid those aspects and elevations altogether, or you're going to stick to really low-angled slopes with no overhead hazard. And if you have to get in there in the steeper terrain, I mean, the important thing to remember is if you're going to get into that terrain, choose terrain that's not going to kill you if it happens to disagree with your assessment of it.
I was talking to my friend Bruce Engelhardt the other day via text, and he goes, it's really not that complicated. If you ski 30-degree trees and don't have any overhead hazard, it's great, no problem. So it really can be pretty simple, but it can also be very complicated, and it must be just an incredible job and just a challenge every day. And
it's a wonderful community, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate your time. It's been great to talk to you.
Howie, thanks so much.
All right. This episode was sponsored by our friends at 10 Barrel Brewing. 10 Barrel Brewing is all about drinking beer outside and crafting award-winning beers at their brewery in Bend, Oregon. In addition to their Bend pub locations, 10 Barrel also has brew pubs in Portland, Boise, Denver, and San Diego, all with self-contained breweries and a dedicated brew team to continue innovating and pushing the limits of craft beer. Did you know 10 Barrel also produces ready-to-drink cocktails? They've got a variety of margaritas and vodka sodas, plus a Bloody Mary, Moscow Mule, and Greyhound, and they're all canned and ready for your next adventure. For more details about all the beers and cocktails and location information for all the 10 Barrel pubs, visit 10barrel.com. The Backcountry podcast is produced by Backcountry Magazine, an imprint of Height of Land Publications in Jeffersonville, Vermont. Lucy Higgins is our editor-in-chief. Our intro music was composed by Alex Paul. Matt Richardson of Bear Pond Productions engineered this episode. Additional thanks to Tyler Cohen, Betsy Monero, Mike Lorenz, Robin Earl, Paul Davis, Justin Ryer, Michelle Peoples, Holly Howard, Karen Heward, and John Costello. At Backcountry Magazine, our small staff works hard to bring you stories that are thoughtfully edited, beautifully produced, and thoroughly fact-checked. Please consider supporting our independent journalism with a subscription to the magazine. You can subscribe or check out other swag at our website, backcountrymagazine.com. Use promo code PODCAST for 10% off your entire order. I'm Adam Howard. Until next time, I'll see you in the hills. Thanks for listening.